Welcome to the Business Spotlight series. My name is Scott Lawson with Action Coach of Coastal Bend in South Texas, and I'll be your host for today. I'm very excited to have our special guest, Erik Nieves, on our show. Erik is a founder and CEO of Plus One Robotics. Today, we're going to talk to Erik about his business, his journey to business ownership, some challenges, some successes, and to have him share what it's really like to own and operate a business as an entrepreneur. If this is your first time on the channel, be sure to like and subscribe so you get notifications when we publish new content. Well, Erik, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Scott. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, me too. Let's just get started. Tell me about your start. How did your journey start?
So I am a roboticist, I guess. And the way that happened is through university, I was working in a factory in Minnesota. So I went to school in Texas, but every summer a bunch of us would hop in a car and drive up to Minnesota to work summer jobs. And it was at a cement mixer company, right? Made cement mixers. And my job was grinding. I would hold an 11 or 12 pound electric grinder in my hands for 10 hours a day, grinding down welds so that the truck could go through paint. And I did that for probably half that first summer when the foreman rolled up on his little cart. I worked nights. And he said, "Hey, Erik, I hear you know something about computers." Scott, this is 1988, maybe 87. I
What
guess it was
was a
88.
computer back then?
Right. I mean, I'm thinking he's having trouble with printer drivers on his IBM PS2 or something. But whatever he's thinking about is better than what I'm doing. Right. And so I said, "Sure, what you got?" And he said, "Well, over there, we have this machine we bought that nobody knows how to make run." And it was a welding robot. So I'm like, okay, read the manual. And I figured out how to push the buttons and get the thing to do what it was supposed to do. And I spent the rest of that summer running a welding robot instead, which I thought was the graviest job ever. Because
Fun.
Yeah, I would load some parts in it, and then I'd hit a green button, and I'd sit in a chair for 15 minutes till it was done. and
Wow.
and I got like 50-cent raise out of this thing. I think I was at $8.50 an hour, brother. This was high living.
And didn't have to grind welds anymore.
Nope, didn't wake up like this, cracking my knuckles to get started. And so I ended up doing that every summer through school till after we'd graduated, and intended to go to grad school, actually at Stephen F. Austin. And they offered me instead to stay on at the factory because they just bought 2 more robots, and would I install them, program them, do all the stuff that I did, for the first one to these other 2.
In Minnesota.
In Minnesota. And so it took some conversation with my fiance, but we ended up skipping grad school and driving ourselves up to Minnesota, and I ended up working there. It turns out that the company that made those 2 robots was based in Ohio. And after those years of installing and running them, I went to work for that robot manufacturer. And I stayed there for 25 years. So I don't know how this happened, but I parlayed a summer job into a career.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
That's fabulous.
And you do a lot of things over that long a period at any one company. And Yaskawa is the second largest robot manufacturer globally. I spent 4.5 years establishing their Latin American subsidiary in Mexico in the 90s. And then ultimately ran their R&D group for the last number of years I was there. And that's how, the story turned. You've seen every car commercial you've ever seen shows robots on the line, welding them, painting them, whatever. I did all of those things. But we kept the nature of the robotics business is that it is so tied to the automotive sales cycle that when automotive is doing great, robotics is doing great. And when automotive goes in the tank, robotics follows it. And when we hit the Great Recession and the North American light vehicle sales plummeted, we had to send people home. Those were tough days in the robot industry. And our president came to me and said, Erik, we have got to find something else for robots to do that isn't tied to making car parts. What is that? And Scott, we did 2 years worth of market investigation. Every vertical you can think of: aerospace, clinical lab automation, all these different markets. And in the end, we figured out there was only 2 that were going to matter: electronics assembly and supply chain and logistics. They were the only 2 that had the sort of requisite combination of volumes and value.
Sure.
But the thing is, electronics assembly is mostly in Southeast Asia, and it's mostly going to stay there, no matter what we do, right? So, but supply chain is always a local problem. So I said, hey, we need to look at this supply chain market and what are the needs. And that's kind of what it came down to is it's like, all right, Erik, if this is such a great idea, why aren't there 1,000 robots a year going into warehouses? Well, it's because there's a technology gap. When you're in the factory, everything is repeatable. Do the same thing the same way because I have to make 800,000 of these widgets and they all need to be exactly alike. But in supply chain, nobody knows what's coming down the line next. I don't know what you ordered last night that I have to ship today, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be different next week, right? And so the warehouse was much less about robotics, the arms, and much more about the computer vision piece.
Oh.
The robots need to see now. And so once that became evident, it was, hey, robot companies are really good hardware companies, but computer vision is a software problem. And so after a few more years working together, I separated from Yaskawa, and my 2 co-founders and I in San Antonio started Plus One Robotics to build the computer vision stack necessary for automation in the warehouse.
Well, that sounds like a good transition to the next topic I'd like to hear about.
Yeah.
Just tell me about the business. Tell me about Plus One Robotics. You've
Sure.
given a little bit of background to get
on
there.
how we got there, right?
Right.
How we got to the idea. So Plus One, effectively, we make the enabling technology that allows those robots that were successful in Detroit to be successful in the warehouse. And so we don't make robots. We don't make any of that sort of hardware piece. We just write the software and use cameras to tell the robot where to go and what to pick next. And this is now 7, 8 years ago now, right? Since we started the business. And we're in Texas, and we do over 1 million picks in the world every single day with robots all over North America and Europe. And we've been very fortunate that the biggest sort of, users in the space, we're famous, or, our biggest market segment is actually the parcel couriers.
Parcel carriers. Okay.
FedEx, U.S. Postal, anybody that shows up at your porch, chances are they've got Plus One's technology somewhere in their operations moving those packages. And so that's what we kind of built the business on. But we were successful because we kind of thought about the problem differently than most. And this is sort of my philosophical view of robotics. Anytime you talk about automation, you sort of have an us versus them scenario. Robots versus jobs.
Oh.
Right? And I'm not a proponent of that view. Instead, the robots need to be tools that the people can leverage. And in the warehouse, the people really don't like doing some of these tasks.
Sounds like Eric grinding those welds.
Exactly. But instead, it's people having to pull 40-pound boxes off a pallet, 8 feet tall, and put them on a conveyor. I mean, these
Hmm.
are people whose days, I mean, they punch in and they punch out, so they're getting paid by the hour, but their shift is really measured in tons. This is not
Mm.
fun work. So they instead use our technology to have the robot pick the stuff off the pallet and put it onto the conveyor. Or, out of the bulk carriers of all the parcels that have been collected that day by all of the trucks and putting those onto the sorting machines that then route them by zip code, etc. So the way that Plus One does it, and the reason we're called Plus One, is because we believe the system is still much, much more reliable if you add a human being.
Oh,
The Plus One is you, right?
I see.
And so instead of call it, 10 robots, you're much more effective to have 9 robots and one crew chief,
I
the
see.
manager. And so
Hmm.
you elevate somebody's job from backbreaking work to now I'm managing a whole set of robots instead. And, we
You know,
built the technology that way.
it occurs to me that it could literally be saving someone from back-breaking work. I'm certain there are a lot of injuries can be prevented by having the robot do the heavy lifting, so to speak.
That is undeniable. In fact, Europe is a little bit ahead of North America in this regard, right? They have regulations in place that limit how much any single person can lift over any single work shift, right? And repetitive motions, a lot of the sort of sorting applications you can imagine are pick up a package on your left and put it on your right. And you have to do this 25 to 30 times a minute for hours.
Hmm.
It's just not, anytime you see a person doing that, that's a person acting like a robot. The robot should have been there, not the person,
Hmm.
right? And
I'm
so,
sure.
do
I'm
that.
sure in your scenario with 9 robots and 1 human, the human can be in an ergonomically accurate setting and in controlling what he or she does there. Yeah,
For sure, for
yeah.
sure. So that's how
What do
we
you?
built the business. Yep.
When I think about viewers who might be business owners or potential business owners, it might be interesting to hear what you think some of your biggest mistakes were, and how did you learn from them? Assuming you did learn from them.
Well, I mean, it's a never-ending, learning experience, isn't it? The notion that technology is coming to the rescue is so overblown, right? It is always an adoption cycle issue. You could have the, answer to a problem in your back pocket, but change management in a legacy industry like warehousing and logistics is exceedingly difficult. These companies, have been doing the same thing the same way for 40 years. And they have a labor problem. They can't get enough workers,
Hmm?
but you can't go up to them and say, "Hey, I have this black box of technology and it's here to save your day." They don't they don't want to hear that, right? They the adoption cycle in a lot of these implementations is longer than I had anticipated.
Hmm.
You know, what ends up happening is you'll do one pilot, one robot in one facility. And when that's successful, then they'll do multiple robots in that one same facility. And when that's successful, then they will go into the network. And, what in the automotive space would have taken 18 months, right? In the logistics space, it could be 4 years from the time you start to the time you're fully rolled out across an entire network of facilities. So
I see.
adoption rate was a lot longer than I had anticipated,
Hmm.
right? That's
That's
one for
interesting.
sure. Yeah, so understanding the your customer's readiness to adopt your solution,
Hmm.
right? Not the ROI, not the can it do the job, but is the organization prepared to accept this new, whatever it might be?
Hmm.
Right?
Is there anything you do differently today to shorten that adoption time?
Well, I think, you know, some of it is inherent, but it gets better. And it gets better when you achieve a level of social proof. Meaning,
Okay.
when, you know, four of the five biggest couriers use your technology,
Hmm.
right? Then the fifth one is like,
Hmm.
okay, I guess I don't have to go through that whole learning cycle. Somebody else paved the way for me. And the
Right.
adoption rate gets better.
Sure.
So one thing that I would encourage is, if you're going to have early adopters, make sure that those early adopters are willing to be advocates also,
Hmm. Hmm.
not just for the technology, but will they be public? Will they be referenceable as, hey, look, this stuff actually works for
Right.
us, right?
Good point.
Yep.
That's great. That's great. Think to the future a little bit. Tell us a little bit about what your aspirations are for, let's say, 5 years down the road. What do you expect to be the new Plus One Robotics at that point in time? What will it
Yeah.
look like?
Well, I know what won't change is this still notion of having a human in the loop, right? I
Okay.
think that that is key.
You put it in the name.
That's right.
I now
And
realize.
I'm not changing it, right? Um, and, I point that out because there is a school of thought, Scott, that AI is going to fix everything for all applications. And, AI is a very powerful tool. We use it in nearly every one of our installations because computer vision relies on a lot of AI tools. That said, if your problem can be expressed on a computer and the answer also lives on a computer, then AI is probably going to really make a difference for you.
Oh, oh.
But when the problem, might start on a computer but then has to move into the physical world, right?
Mm-hmm.
AI breaks down here.
I see.
ChatGPT can write you a wonderful paper on inertia, friction, etc. But it doesn't really understand any of those things. It doesn't
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
experience them. But robots do.
Mm.
So, even 5 years from now, AI is going to be limited in what it can bring to robotics. You're always going to have people in the mix. So that part remains. What is true is the number of sort of manifestations of what the robot can do in the warehouse is going to continue to grow. And here's what I mean. In the end, if you picked up, your cup of coffee off your desk, you would use your eyes, your arm, and your hand in that order, right? You saw it, you reached for it, and you grasped it. Robotics is the same way. It's just artificial eyes and mechanical hands, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's fundamentally hand-eye coordination.
Hmm.
And if you think about it that way, when you look at warehouses, you can stand back and go, how many different instances of hand-eye coordination am I looking at here?
Hmm.
We've picked just a couple of them, taking the boxes off the pallet and taking the packages and putting them onto the sorter. But there's others. There's plenty of others. There's people loading inventory. There's people unloading trucks. There's people building pallets. There's all sorts of other, but fundamentally it's the same problem.
Hmm.
Eyes, arm, and hands. So the
Mm-hmm.
future for Plus One is the future for anybody in any industry. It's you land and then you expand. You expand your share of wallet, and you do
Hmm.
that by adding more tools to your toolkit that the user can leverage, right? The I
Very
can tell
interesting.
you, the customers want that. The customers
Mm-hmm.
don't want 20 different applications of automation in their facilities with 20 different suppliers. That's not what they want. They want to be
Hmm.
able to see that they can leverage across, a handful of suppliers and get covered, for what they need done.
That's great.
Yep.
Yeah, I can just picture that. I love that explanation. If I've
Yeah.
got a robot doing these tasks, if I stand back and look, I'm sure in a warehouse, I start right
Yeah.
away. I probably start to think, wouldn't it be great if I had that robot doing this task and this task too?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we kind of break down the tasks. As an automation guy, I just stand against the back wall and look, and
Hmm.
you'll see there's a bunch of people with wheels, right? The forklift
Like Ford
drivers,
trucks.
yeah, the guys pulling the carts or pushing the
Hmm.
dollies. That's all the mobility class. And
Okay.
then you have the people with stuff in their hands that I call the manipulation class.
Oh, uh-huh.
Right? And the manipulation class is where hand-eye coordination happens. The manipulation class is also where all the repetitive motion injuries happen.
Hmm.
Right? So it's eager for the types of solutions that this industry is bringing.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
Eric, tell me about your own definition of success. And for instance, who do you think of? What person do you think of when you think of success, and why?
I got to tell you, I'm taking this a different direction because, the person that I think about the most with, did my life matter or not is mom, right?
Hmm. I love it.
And mom only, mom's gone now, but she only ever
Oh,
asked two questions, of me and my two brothers. What wisdom have you gained in this life? And how have you increased your capacity to love?
mm,
That's it. And, I try to live my life with those precepts in mind. And of course, some of it is going to apply to my role as CEO and founder. And I can talk about, the wisdom I've gleaned through, rounds of funding and venture backed. Oh, that's fine. But, how have you increased your capacity to love? I think that should be every person's measure of success.
wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's get things. Let's make the important things important. Let's
Yeah,
let's do. Yeah, I
that's
think
right.
that's so good. Actually, that's a fairly good segue. I just from our previous conversation and knowing a little bit about what your priorities are. I also thought it'd be interesting for our audience to hear your answer to what conversation do you have with a new team member, say
Yeah,
on their first day.
right. So, we're a young company, right? Meaning, a lot of our employees, would be graduate level. They just finished their master's in controls engineering or something, right? So,
Hmm.
often this is their first real job. And, day one is always exciting. I don't care if you're, just a newbie out of school or if you're a career, person and this is your 10th job. The first day is always an exciting day. Um, and I will sit someone down and say, hey, I want to actually talk to you about your last day at Plus One.
Your
And
last day.
yep. And that's pretty much the reaction that I get sometimes is, uh, what? And it's because I want folks to understand if we hired you, it's because you are so capable. You are, technologically savvy. You've got great acumen at what you do. You've, shown a good work ethic, etc. You're going to be a rock star on your own merits. And what that tells me is you're not going to retire from Plus One, right? I'm going to retire from Plus One, but I'm 58. If you're 28, you're not.
Mm,
So if we can just establish that the day is going to come when you're going to leave, let's have a conversation about what that day should be. When
mm,
should you do that? And my position is you should leave the day you stop learning with us. Because, brother, that's the day this job became a paycheck. And
mm.
life is too short. Back to mom's first question, what wisdom have you gained in this life? If
Right.
you've stopped learning with us, you owe it to yourself to go start learning with somebody else.
Mm,
And so, you know, that's what I tell them. And what I find is first it takes them aback, but then they really appreciate it. That
mhm,
you're just gonna be that frank about with it, and that you're doing it because you believe they're a winner,
mhm.
right? And what I also like is what it means for me and for my leadership team. Because if we're saying, hey, this person's going to leave if they stop learning, we don't want that. So it means we make sure to give them plenty of opportunities to continue to grow in the organization. You want to take
Right.
some class? We'll support you. You think there's some seminar or conference that would bring you value? We'll support you. You want to try something new in the company? We'll support you because we want your day one to continue and we want your last day to be as far out as we can make it. But that day is coming and we're all okay with it.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
There are a few things you've already mentioned that kind of answer my next question, but I'll throw it out there. You may have other things that would answer this as well. What differentiates you? What differentiates Plus One from other companies? Maybe other companies in your industry or
Yeah.
others that you could be compared to.
Sure. You know, robotics isn't new, but warehouse automation is. Okay. And this is important because a lot of the sort of folks that have come into the warehouse automation space in the last 5 years, think about what COVID did for a lot of
Hmm.
people. They were all like, look, warehouse automation is going to be hugely important. And a lot of people jumped into the space and there was a lot of investment that came in. And we welcome all that. But there's not a lot of expertise in what the warehouse operators really live day to day, right? These are not, anytime you're dealing with legacy industries, again, it is not a technology play, it is operations.
Hmm.
So, kind of our secret sauce is the DNA of the company came from operators. We've all been delivering, solutions to real world customers for many, many years. It's not an academic exercise for us, right? And so that's that sort of, you know, basis for having interactions with the market is hugely important. And so
Hmm.
anytime we add to the team, we're always highly indexed to, you ever worked in the back of a truck? Have you
Oh.
ever had to break down pallets, right? Um,
Hmm.
because, we have 5 pillars that we run the company by. And the
Oh.
first of those is empathy for the customer, right? And, it's hard to have empathy if you haven't done it. So, we value folks that have had experience in the warehouse, right?
I see. That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. One last question I like to kind of wrap things up with. If you could do it all over again, what would you do differently?
Uh, I would be I would have had more of this understanding that you need to be focused on a couple of applications and not many of them, right?
Hmm.
So everything we talked about all the different manifestations of hand-eye coordination, in the early days of Plus One, we tried them all, right?
Oh.
And because, well, hey, the technology stack is the same, we should be able to do it. But you spread yourself so thin that you never get to fully solving the problem. Every one of these implementations has nuance, and the nuance is beyond the technology, right? And so we would have failed by now had we not at some point said we're going to cut off and focus on just a couple of applications. Scott, I
Hmm.
have to tell you, that was a hard decision because we had to fire
I'll
some
bet. Oh.
customers,
Hmm.
folks that we were doing good work with, but it wasn't going to be scalable. And
Hmm.
so we said we're going to have to focus on those applications that the package is already sealed. We're not dealing with the items themselves, we're dealing with the package once it's taped shut. And we turned a corner. If I had known that
Hmm.
even 2 years sooner, we would probably be 4 years ahead, right?
Right. Right.
right?
I think that goes along with the advice that I find myself giving companies and managers often is don't try to be all things to all people.
Yep.
You know, you really can spread yourself so thin. Now, early in an organization, it's hard to ever say no. If there's a
Yeah.
customer that wants the lowest price or they want
Yeah.
a new product that does something else,
Yep.
it's hard for them to say no to that.
Yeah.
But if you don't eventually decide this is where my niche is,
Yep.
you're trying to be all things to all people, you're not going to be excellent at any of them, you know.
Yeah,
So
and we had, kind of kidded ourselves that, hey, look, we're not trying to be all things to all people. It's always the same warehouse automation space that's asking. So we thought we were in the right just because of that. You have to be even more focused than just the segment. You have to figure out the sub segment applications that you can do well and scale with. And then you earn the right to go back and do more of them.
mm-hmm.
But if
Right,
you don't,
right.
then you don't make it, period. Right?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Erik. Thanks for sharing your story. This has been insightful, and I hope the audience finds it informative and valuable. I'm sure they will. This is the Business Spotlight series with Scott Lawson of Action Coach of Coastal Bend and Erik Nieves of Plus One Robotics. Please be sure to like and subscribe so you can continue to see great content. Thank you for being with us today, Erik.
I enjoyed it a lot, Scott. Thank you, and thank you all.